Thank you for joining me for another episode of Awaken Empowered TV. I'm your host, Ethan Fox. Today I have a very special video from our 2017 Awaken Empowered Expo, the Extraterrestrial Influences panel. There are a number of really well-known speakers on stage who are taking questions from our audience in a variety of subject areas, from ancient archaeology to extraterrestrial contact to how to nurture and support the children that are in the world today. A lot of very fascinating topics. And on those, along those lines, I want to mention that we have our Seed of Life School summer program coming up this summer. It's going to be the first weekend in August, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, the first weekend in August 2018. And we'll soon be posting information on how you can sign your kids up for that. We'll have a lot of really interesting things for them to learn and experience there, and we'll be bringing in teachers from all over the world to teach these different subjects. So stay tuned for that. Follow our Facebook pages or even my personal Facebook page, and you'll be informed when the registration is open for that. We also have our 2018 Awaken Empowered Expo this September 7th, 8th, and 9th, 2018 at the DoubleTree Hotel in downtown Detroit in Michigan in the United States. So join us for that. In the meantime, here's a little clip from last year's Expo.
I have a son that I believe might have something special going on. He functions normally, he's brilliant, beautiful, but at night he sees things. He made a little stuffed animal that looks kind of like a gray, about this big, and he sleeps with it. He's very quick. Sometimes I'll look and he's there, and he just shows up. And he does have some of that language thing you were showing me yesterday. I want to nurture his gifts without scaring him. I don't know if you have any suggestions, briefly.
Well, it's actually brilliant that you already know and are aware of his sensitivities. That's the first thing with any parent, is to actually see those differences and recognise them. Sounds like he's got a really good mum because you are listening, you're seeing it. And really, just continue doing what you're doing, is to listen to him and hear how he articulates things, and if there's anything worries him. I would suggest to, or say to you, have you had things happen as well that's made you more aware of your son and his gifts?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm not surprised, because usually that's the case. So, because of that, and because of your own sensitivity, just listen to that inner voice that tells you what to do with him, because that's going to be your best guide.
Okay.
Okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah, just follow meditation. Okay. Thank you.
Can I answer that? Yeah, please. I have a son who was adopted, took him in when he was 3 years old. He had a very rough time, severely abused and neglected. And, if any of you have seen the movie Buck, it was about a gentleman who, in the 50s and 60s, him and his son, they were rodeo tricksters, and they were on TV, and the father was very abusive, extremely abusive, and Buck learned how to communicate with horses in this beautiful way. He's the real horse whisperer. He worked with Redfin on the movie, and he would just guide the horses and have this incredible way of dealing with them because of the sensitivity or the difficulty, And what I did for my son was, put stars on the ceiling and sit and build cities out of cardboard boxes with them and play with blocks, and always and buy him like 100 stuffed animals, and everyone has a new name, and it's create this environment of like comfort and safety around the heart and around gifts and around the specialness of your child, instead of, oh, the world is a scary place, or it's like, that's just a bad dream, son, and I'm here to love you and support you. And obviously you guys are coming from that orientation, but I just found that, now my son's 22 and he lives with me, and he's, all the difficulty he's had pales in comparison to his level of compassion, his ability to see the good in people and to read people and to have special gifts, even though he has neurological struggles. So it's like, wow, this being, instead of, I don't want to get too long-winded, but he basically had reactive attachment disorder, the serial killer specification. one of the most intractable mental health disorders, and it's a long, road I took to heal him. But now, everybody he meets in his life, he meets with love and compassion. And just think of the ripple effect of that one being. And the way you can deal with your child is just, imbue the sense of safety, I feel anyways. It's my experience. Like, everything is fine and you're special, and just like, really focus on the heart of your child more than anything else. And that's, and Ethan keeps bringing up ways of parenting, and I'm like, ooh, I could see, I just got to step back, because I'm a coach, I can be overbearing, like, oh, son, you got to do this, and I step back, and the blossoming is amazing, So I could see you guys are really great parents anyways, and that's such a wonderful thing. The world needs that. But I just see the love you have for your child, and just like, do what you would want done to you as a child, right? Stars on the ceiling and stuffed animals everywhere, and it's just true. Like, I'm a fake tough guy, but like, I cruise around with my teddy bear, It's like, it really, it's a meaningful thing to do, And thanks for being good parents.
I could add a little to that. Just real quick. Yeah, so I'm mother of two very sensitive, gifted children in different directions. And one went towards the gift, and the other was so freaked out she ran away from what was happening. And I found that with her, questioning was a super great tool, because I taught her that we could sit together and we could question these beings that were talking to her about why they were here, who were they, what was their intention. And questioning requires a different vibrational stance than fear. Because when you're questioning something, it's almost like an authoritative vibration. Not in a bad way or a mean way, but almost like an inquisitive way. And she was able to pull in so much incredible information that I think it blew her own mind. So now she goes towards safely, but has better experiences in that, in that energetic realm, because of the way she has learned to communicate differently.
Hi. I also have a son. He's 30 now, but I'm a grandmother of two. I love children. I think actually all children are special. And so when you're being attentive and loving to your child, it's sort of, as opposed to giving them what you always wanted as a kid, see what they need and try to meet that need as they develop into their own person separate from ourselves, but feeling comforted and safe. So if your child doesn't have a pet, I would highly recommend a dog, a puppy, a cat, something that they can share a silent communication and love with. And this really helps the children develop their nurturing skills. So as they're nurtured, they can learn to nurture something else. And I found that that gave both my children and my grandchildren a sense of ease and peace as they continue to develop and allow their specific energies to flow.
Extra little thought here. And I wasn't able to hear your whole question, but I'm assuming that you have a child who's having unusual experiences with 11?
He's kind of an animal. He can attract animals. He can hold bees. He can catch bees. He did it land birds sometimes in the past. When he sees things at night, he's asked to be homeschooled, and they're thriving. My boys are thriving. They're thriving. I just have this undercurrent of things that come up at night, and we sit with them or bring them back to bed, say anything. We don't say, you didn't see anything, go back to bed. We just ask them what he saw, sit with them, and say it's going to be okay. Yeah, we need good things to come our way. Like, I'm sure everyone has that with their children. Just things out of the ordinary, and I expect it, and I welcome it. But I also want to nurture it.
Now, is part of the situation that he has unusual beings coming to him?
Yeah, colors.
Oh, colors? Okay. Well, what I have found with adults and children, if they have, a lot of confusion or fear or sometimes even trauma, about these unusual things happening at night in the room alone, that it helps to direct their attention to how much can they observe about what's happening. You know, what can they learn from this? Oh, like if it's beings in the room or colors, you know, what do they really look like? What describe that? Notice next time. Do they move around? Is there sound with it? You know, is there a feeling with it? In other words, I think one of the ways that I have found that can help people get past the fear part of it is to direct their minds to really notice, almost like doing research. I mean, an adult would think of it more as doing research. Oh, I'm going to notice everything I can possibly notice here, and I'm going to remember this. It's sort of a way of taking back your own power, that I'm not just here a victim of whatever this unusual thing is, but I'm really participating and I'm taking hold of it in some way for myself. I'm gaining for it myself.
Hi, morning everybody. This message is for a question for Caroline and Michaela. In your past channelings, lectures, interviews, you guys both talked about a 12th dimension and how the 13th dimension is being created as we speak. We have a picture of a solar system right there, galaxy over on this side, and we have Andromeda galaxy moving on a collision course. We have Triangulum galaxy coming around us. Is this like constant movement? Does it end somewhere in your contacts with ET? What do they say about, does it just continues to expand? Does it collapse back on itself? Is this changing, like we talked about Sagittarius shift yesterday? Is it going to change again? Like, does the universe end? Is it, what's the answer, I guess would be the Thank you.
From my perspective, based on what I've channeled, I believe that this universe was designed to continually expand. And we were created in the likeness of that expansion. So we're the microcosm of the macrocosm in our own lives, expanding the consciousness of the universe. So everything that we do in our experience here on this planet has a ripple effect on the expansion of the entire universe. And so I do believe that new dimensional realities are created of that expansion. And I believe that planet Earth was created of that expansion. So I do believe it's a continual process. I don't believe that it's going to collapse on itself. And we're not the only universe out there that this is taking place within. And I actually believe that there can be some overlap as well, that as we continue to expand, we're going to be able to tap into ulterior universes and communicate with that collective and continue to expand our dimensional reality through other universal experiences as well. So infinity is the answer.
Hi, good morning. I agree that the universe is continuously expanding. However, I feel that at this time there's something very unique and different that is happening. I feel and I see that the entire planetary system is being reconfigured. Speaking of grid, it's as if we talked about yesterday the previous grid being misaligned, being cut off from the rest of the universe. And now the new grid structure is reconnecting not only planet Earth with the rest of the planetary system, but the planetary system is now repositioning itself differently within the galaxy. And of course that effect is a ripple effect. It affects the whole universe. Also, I want to say that a lot of people wonder why Earth and why, what's so special? It's not that special. Well, it is. Well, actually, what's happened, without getting into too many details, but I believe that when a planetary system is created within a galaxy, within a universe, it's kind of like its immediate parent or direct umbilical cord is the planetary system, and then the galaxy. And that connects it back to the universe. However, when this universe was created and when this planetary system was created, something is very, very different about it. It's sort of an experiment, but not in a bad way, in a positive way. And planet Earth and this part of the universe, this part of the planetary system, had a different type of connection. Instead of going back to the galaxy and back to the universe, it had a kind of a direct link to the center of the universe, to the core of the universe, which makes it very different and interesting because this means that whatever happens here on planet Earth is instantaneously affecting the core of the universe. You see what I mean? And when that happens, then whatever happens on this planet happens across the universe in a different way, in a more direct way. And again, I've been working on this for many, many years, and now I'm just crunching the answer into something very concise, just to give you an idea. But that's the reason why the position of the Earth within this local universe is extremely unique and important. And that's why we're all here. There's a bunch of different types of beings who aren't even meant to incarnate. They're not even meant to ever come to a planetary system, but they're all coming from different parts of the universe and in fact from other universes, specifically to fix that, if you will, to reposition it correctly so that it continues on its course of evolution and continues to move the entire universe on that course. And as you well know, the planet was completely isolated. It was stuck. And that's the so we are at this juncture, and that's why you see all these crazy things happening that seem unusual, and they're kind of unusual. They wouldn't be unusual if they were happening sporadically or as a cyclical thing, but we're observing them in this short period of time, and they seem odd. So that's one thing, but I also want to add something about dimensions, because I hear a lot, we're going into the 5th dimension and 12th dimension, and to me it doesn't really work this way. The grid system is multidimensional. So even here, where we think we're 3-dimensional, we see, this is 3-dimensional, your body's 3-dimensional, but you access multidimensional all at once. You don't kind of graduate to 4 and then graduate to 5th. You know what I mean? So when you're focused on your 10% brain capacity, you're tapping into just the 3-dimensional aspect of the all that is. And as you expand, it's a range of dimensions that you're expanding into. You see the difference as opposed to going linearly, 5th dimension, 6th dimension. And then when you are able to use your full brain capacity, this is when you are tapping into multidimensionality all at once. So you can go to any point within the universe instantaneously with that full brain capacity. That is multidimensionality, you see? So that's, to me, how it works. Was that helpful?
Jim, question for you while everybody else is waking up. What sort of concrete or even scientific evidence have you seen to support the existence of extraterrestrial life?
Ethan's question is, what evidence is there for, does science have for extraterrestrial visitation? I actually met Eric von Daniken a couple weeks ago at the Edgar Cayce conference that I spoke at, and he's a really nice guy. I think he's 82 years old. And I know the sins of production from creating television shows myself, where it's not a scientific document. It's entertainment. You're trying to do research and tell a story at the same time. So people misperceive a theory. And Eric says, well, I theorized about that. I was wrong. I believe I'm correct about that. And when you hear his presentation, actually, it's quite impressive, all the information he puts together. And what I do is a comparative analysis of all kinds of sources, of the mystics, secret societies, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, religious documents. I do a lot of ayahuasca ceremonies, San Pedro ceremonies. I talk to indigenous healers, and I hear their oral traditions all around the planet, and I compare all those things, and they all give the same story, which I'll talk about later today, that Atlantis existed, Lemuria existed. They were giants and little people as part of the population. The original humans prototype was androgynous. Plato says all this as well. And that we got stuck in matter, if you will. And basically, there was a great flood about 12,000 years ago, the Younger Dryas impact theory, if you're familiar with that, that destroyed civilization, and the survivors came all around the world and repromulgated civilization. And some of those survivors are called the Shining Ones that showed up in Sumeria about 8,000 to 9,000 years ago. And the Sumerian civilization just right off the bat was extremely complex. And science has not been able to figure out why that is so. And the Shining Ones really have the hallmark, not of just an advanced civilization, but of extraterrestrials, if you will. And they are, it's like a science fiction movie. When you read the interpretations, the Book of Enoch, the Akkadian texts, the Sumerian texts, and you find out that these Shining Ones were scientists. There was pest control and urban planning, and they did all these incredible things, just like happened in Central and South America when Viracocha and the Shining One showed up there, or in Ireland and other places. So all around the world, there are specific beings that are indicated as showing up and bringing civilization. And then once again, I'll get into that, some of the incredible geometry and mathematics that's been found in Sumeria, including cuneiform tablet Plimpton 322, which has just been deciphered after 100 years. It's a new form of trigonometry, and it's stunningly sophisticated. And the scientists are looking back and saying, wow, this is quite a thing. How did the Sumerians have this knowledge? And I will share my interpretation of it, or the historical facts that this androgynous being brought this information. And I will get into all that. I think hopefully you guys will find it fascinating. But for me, all the ancient texts speak of alien visitation. And then you have skull elongation all around the planet. My buddy Brian Forrester studies that as well. And it's just stunning. Like every isolated island, every place, even the Native American tribes, the royal leaders would elongate their skulls. Akhenaten, you see it in Egypt too. What are they emulating? Who are these beings? And it's really odd. There was a woman, her name, Karen Hughes. She was the lead counsel for the World Bank, and she did an interview as a whistleblower a couple of years ago, and she said these beings with elongated skulls are from the distant past. And this is a woman who's giving testimony about like banking crimes, and she says that these elongated beings, they have influence in the Vatican and in the banking system. And before the last ice age, they were extremely influential, and they were extraterrestrial in origin. And I was like blown away when I saw that. And hearing all the wonderful people here, you get this consistent theme that it's not so insane. Just think of the idea of the world is flat and how ludicrous that is. But think of the idea that we are the only life that's ever sprung up in a universe that's so incomprehensibly vast. So for me, I see the evidence everywhere. It's hidden in plain sight. It's in the texts. It's in the oral traditions. It's in the iconography. You see artifacts that are clearly, representative of different alien races. And frankly, I work with archaeological teams. I work with professionals. And I used to want to earn some credibility in their sphere, in their realm. And I'm friends with a lot of professionals, but I have to tell them I see a different version of reality. And as I'm a researcher, I'm an obsessed person who's into a mystery, and I have to go with my gut. And I have to, if I'm going to sit here and talk to you guys, I'm going to have to put my ego aside, my agenda aside, if I have one, and just say, this is what 30 years of research has taught me, that the story of humanity has extraterrestrial influences involved in it that continue to this day. And, I can't really, show you the crashed land, the spaceship that's crashed, but I can tell you I've spoke to a lot of Air Force personnel and police officers and people who are trained in observation. There's no question there are things that are going on. my brother Kevin served 20 years in the Air Force, and my father was in World War II in Berlin, and I understand the military culture and the secrecy, and you know, have seen so many things and talked to so many people. I'd say it's incontrovertible that there is extraterrestrial life, and it's almost not even worth saying the obviousness of it, especially here. It's like, okay, that's our starting point. Now where do we go? But I understand people haven't awoken to that reality, you know. But for me, as an independent researcher and somebody who is a fan of science to a certain extent, I must say there's no question that that's what I believe at this point.
For those who don't know, I just finished a documentary film called E.T. Contact. And in the process, one of the folks that we interviewed was a professor of microbiology, and he's a geneticist at Stanford. And as we were talking, we were talking about the DNA, obviously, and he brought up something very interesting. He said, you know, that there's something called Moore's Law. And I don't know if you're familiar with that is, but Moore's Law excuse me, studies the complexity of a system. So they look at any system, like for example, an electrical system, how often does it double over a period of time? So, so they did that, and you can look it up, how it works, Moore's Law. And so they did that with the DNA. And so they took the human DNA and they retraced back linearly over a period of time. When was the last time that the DNA doubled in complexity? And that was 600 million years. In other words, the way the DNA is right now, 600 million years ago, it was half the complexity. 600 million years before that was half of that. Does that make sense? So they kept going back and back and back 600, because you see the rhythm, when does it switch? And so they kept going back to the very first time until it couldn't be double, it couldn't be double in complexity. And that point was 9 billion years ago. So what does that tell you? The human DNA is 9 billion years old. Hello? Planet Earth is how old? 4 whatever billion years. So this means that the human DNA is older than planet Earth. And this means that if it's older than the planet, then it came from somewhere else. Does that make sense? So they were able to retrace that using the scientific method. And so to me, which of course experientially, I mean, we already know, and even scientifically, they know that we're not alone in the universe. But when this sort of evidence starts to show up, you start to look at things differently. That, okay, well, human DNA started somewhere else, could be anywhere in the universe, but not on Earth. Therefore, it was brought here. It got here somehow, somewhere, not from the Earth. Therefore, it was anyway of extraterrestrial origin. So then that begs the question, are we all not from somewhere, you see? And then, of course, as you know, with all of you with your work, you know very well that we're meeting people every day. And we know very well they are connected to the stars for a reason. They're seeing invisible friends for a reason. The children remember where they came from. We know deep inside ourselves that we belong. Or why are we even asking the question, where did we come from? If it is a fact that, you know, our parents make us and we're a genetic code from our human parents and that's the end of the story, well, where does that question come from? The wanting, the need to look for our lineage beyond the earth. It's because there is something in our DNA that actually came from beyond the earth. That's what I believe. And so there's more and more evidence also archaeologically, like Jim was saying, but Now when you put all these pieces together, you start to see more of this scientific evidence from all different directions, and you start to validate even more when somebody comes to you and says, I feel connected to this star system or what have you, or I have this past life experience or on this other planet, so on and so forth. You know this is real. And the more you see this evidence, the more you see of it, and you start to recognize that lineage. Other than I personally have seen, ETs in physical form here, but that's a different story, unless you want me to tell you. But I'll let others talk more about that.
Also, the human genome DNA carries 22.2 strands of extraterrestrial DNA that our scientists for decades have referred to as junk DNA. And so that's all the empirical evidence that's required at this point. But the big philosophical questions that have bothered mankind for a millennium or two is, what are we and where are we from? So we do seek and desire to know where we're ultimately connected to. We can see quite easily that the chemical composition of the human body is that of any star. And it's just a matter of the physical manifestation into a carbon-based body on this particular planet. It's the consciousness that is malleable, adaptable to whatever the star system is. We go where we need to go until we make it back into the full, unfragmented wholeness of whence we came.
And I'd like to add that one of the other things that I have heard is whistleblower geneticists that have said there is no question that we have been altered in terms of intelligent design, that certain parts of the genome and genes have been spliced and put together again, which is completely in line with this happening from some other intelligence, because they now can recognize it through the DNA and looking at the DNA in the way they do now. They are very aware. But this geneticist that wrote about this said, if I spoke about this publicly, I would be ostracized by my colleagues and forced to live in a tent. So there's so much you don't know, and we're not told by mainstream science.
One of the two scientists who first sequenced DNA, Crick was his name, he talked about there's no question he believed there was alien intervention, what he saw, and that was actually quite a while ago. And that's just another, when you're in an individual specialized field and you see something, you just don't get support anyway. You're like, wow, this just doesn't fly. But if you do a comparative analysis of all these different fields, a different story emerges, especially if you're open-minded and you can see it. And this, I had read about him, and I didn't know there were other scientists who joined that. Yeah, and I'm not too well-versed in genetics, but when you look at the evidence, it's quite compelling. It really is pretty straightforward.
And also, at this time in history, we have the technology to do selective DNA. We can clone, we can choose the eye color, hair color, and other physical attributes of a human. It's really not that far-fetched to understand that we can tinker ourselves now, and most likely we will. And so we have to be careful where that manipulation begins to either suppress our natural ability to expand our consciousness and develop. We have to keep our eye on science. I'm a huge science buff myself, but we have to also be wary that just because we can do something doesn't mean that we necessarily should.
Well, from a whole different point of view about this subject, for the last few years, my work has included a lot of knowing of people who are ET human hybrids living here on the Earth. And these are wonderful people, full of many, many talents, special abilities that most of us don't have. They're very excellent. And they have a lot of contact with the extraterrestrial beings whom they have some genetics from. And they were all made to be hybrids by these extraterrestrial beings. So in all cases of the 15 or so whom I know very well, these hybrids, they have a variety of extraterrestrial species genetics in them. And so when they visit with them very frequently, it's a very positive experience because these beings feel like they're family, like they're real family, even though they were born here on Earth of human parents. But they've learned from these beings that they've had many, many previous lifetimes as those kinds of beings. And one of them, a woman named Jacqueline Smith, she does what she calls a star origin reading. And she gave me one in return for a regression. And she is able to look at a person and tune in psychically, clairvoyantly, whatever, to see what the soul lineage is of that person from the very beginning of coming into any kind of incarnation, eons ago in many cases. And so she can see when you've been in the celestial realms without a physical body, and when you've been a mantis being and a dolphin-like being and a Sirian and an Arcturian and an Andromedan, a mantis being. And from my experience of her doing that, it absolutely made sense that that's where we came from. And with every little episode she told me for my soul journey, I just resonated enormously. Like, oh, that's why I love the mantis beings. That's why I had to swim with dolphins a number of times here, because I was that kind of being. I was a mantis. And so anyway, it's wonderful that that's coming out more, that from that point of view. And also as a regression therapist, when I first got into this work, which was past life regression therapy back in the mid-1980s, to my great surprise, without ever having considered that there were other beings in the universe, I thought that was science fiction and didn't pay any attention to it. But sometimes in regressing a therapy client, I would find that that client had had a previous lifetime as another kind of being on a different planet. And so that began to sort of open up my scope of thinking about things. So I think that we all here have had an amazing heritage, which really isn't amazing, but from our little tiny human point of view, everyday life, knowing everyday people we know, it seems pretty amazing, but we're all from somewhere else. I feel convinced of it.
I know we have another question, but I feel like I'll just input really quick, because what I do is very similar to the reading that you had. And in session, what I find is that information in our DNA is so incredibly valuable because we're constantly integrating this new information. So as we raise our consciousness, that information that's within our multidimensional DNA, it actually becomes a part of our human experience. So what I often find is as we go through transitions, or all of a sudden we're changing direction or changing our work in some way, it's because we've tapped into that information. And these beings that assist my readings will actually show the connection between what we've chosen on Earth. And it's usually the things we love. It's usually the things we love to do, like art and music and science and research and technology. We brought those gifts and abilities and passions with us from these other dimensional timelines, and they're showing up here for us. And that's the really beautiful thing, I think, that's held in that multidimensional DNA.
So it's interesting, my question's related to what Barbara and Michaela, what you just said. I'm interested to know if any of you have researched or spoken with people who have what they think is a walk-in experience. I think that was very common in the 60s and 70s. And I had that sense of myself. And until I heard Carolyn speak yesterday, and I thought, well, maybe perhaps it's just another aspect. And if in fact it's coming from a much higher dimension or off planet, it can have the feel of a walk-in because it's so different. But in fact, it's not a walk-in of something different, but an aspect of ourselves. So I'm interested to know conversations you've had and whether, some people say, no, walk-ins never happen. It isn't something that happens, and then others say, yes, I had that experience.
You know, when we're doing this work, I'm sure we all feel this way, it is such a joy to share some of what we're discovering. I mean, I just can't keep it to myself, and I don't have a lot of people in my daily life to share this sort of thing with, so thank you for all being here and giving us a chance to share. I can see you're all resonating with that. Anyway, to address the question, in my therapy work, regression work particularly, I have come to know about 5 different people who are walk-ins. They have discovered that they are walk-ins, and I feel convinced that they are too. Now, some of them walk in from, not from an extraterrestrial lifetime or point of view, but they're walking in from a spiritual realm, and they've come here to do spiritual work. And of course, that happens sometimes when a person is married. A regular human is married, and then at some point in time, their soul has decided that it's time to go. It could be for a whole variety of reasons. Doesn't need to be that they're sick or they're depressed or anything, although sometimes that is the case. So one of these other beings could be extraterrestrial, could be a pure spiritual being, recognizes that this person is really through with life, even if in the person's 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, still with a good number of years left to live, presumably, and they will make a soul exchange so that when the original human leaves the body, the other one comes in. So it has to be very precise timing. And then when the new one comes in, the new one looks the same because it's the same body, but acts completely different. And maybe it was somebody who was interested in, smoking and gambling and drinking, let's say, and then now has, with the new one in there, has nothing to do with that whatsoever, and seems to be on a much more metaphysical or spiritual path or service path, one way or the other. And so the family of that original person, thinking this is the same person because the body is the same, really has some adjusting to do. So one of these women who came in from the spiritual realm was married to a guy. He was a motorcycle biker and just kind of a regular fella, loving his motorcycle trips and stopping in at the bar and that type of thing. And she loved it. The original person loved it as well. And suddenly, one day, they woke up and she was totally different and wanted to meditate and wanted to pray and wanted to start teaching spiritual matters and didn't want to ride the motorcycle or drink a whole bunch anymore. So that I met them when they were right at that crisis point when he was thinking, boy, she sure has changed. I mean, overnight she changed. And she's thinking, I don't know how to deal with this guy, that we are really on different vibrations here. But anyway, it's a great honor, I think, that other beings are coming in and living in a human form without having to go through gestation in the womb and birth and babyhood and growing up through all the years. They can get right on with their work after the initial adjustment. Another thing about that I have found is that very often the walk-in, being new to the earth and new to all the viruses and bacteria and allergens, that sometimes they have difficulty assimilating our food and are allergic to a number of things. That doesn't always happen, but I've known a couple of walk-in people for whom that was true. And that difficulty might go on for years until they can get some good help with it and understand that they're a walk-in. And that's why suddenly all these difficulties started to arise.
I've definitely had some soul walk-ins in session that have been very similar to what Barbara's talking about, but I also have another perspective on this that's been coming in, and a lot of my channeling talks about the new grid that Caroline was discussing in her presentation, and I feel like that new grid, because it's multidimensional, we have this new time-space reality to tap into other aspects of our soul vibration. So we have this soul that's fragmented into all of these other timelines and lives, but we haven't been aware of what that information is. But now, collectively, we can tap into that information and we're beginning to integrate it. And I believe that that's why maybe that phenomenon was so much more prevalent in the past, and it's becoming far more, I don't know, integrated with our collective because we're awakening, you know? And I think the awakening process is really the integration of those timelines and that information. And that's why when our consciousness and our vibration changes, we change so much. Our lives change. We can change on a dime. Things can happen, and you know, relationships, money, the place that we live will completely shift because we've stepped onto a new timeline that's more integrated of these fragmented soul pieces.
I am working with a man right now who is convinced that he is a reptilian extraterrestrial walk-in. Where's the lady that asked the question? There you are. Hi. And yes, I think that a soul can be a walk-in, but I believe that there's a specific reason for it that goes beyond a mere exchange of a cultural experience. So the reptilian entity, I asked, why would you walk into a human experience? And he said that he felt that at this time on the planet, the reptilians were getting a very bad reputation in that all of them weren't as, you know, bloodthirsty seeking as maybe their thought to be, in that he wanted to come to create a more neutral understanding to explain the different species of reptoids. So he felt that he had a purpose, and quite frankly, he did change. And in 1 minute, he was one person, and then quite frankly, the next minute, he was another. And everything changed. The food that he ate, where he lived, he moved out of a relationship, and he has become in service not only of humanity, but he's in service of a larger understanding. So it does happen, but there's a moment and an agreement and an understanding. And generally a soul who has a walk-in and they're switching, they have had a past relationship. And it's generally not their first time that they've done that. So they get to experience the vessel of the human body. And a lot of people, me included, I remember quite clearly the first time that I came to this planet, and it wasn't being born. It was a full adult. And not saying that that's a walk-in, but I have an absolutely clear, distinct memory of everything. And it was in 1 second I was here. I remember the process of coming as well. And so it does happen. It's not a big deal. It's just unusual. But there's a bigger reason for it. And I might suggest to you that you have a hypnotherapy session and a regression to perhaps even going to the defining moment in this lifetime or a past experience when that happened, just to give yourself a little bit better clarity as to what the purpose was for. Then you won't have to guess, is it true or not true?
I'd like to just add to what everyone's been saying. I'll tell you one lady that told me that she was she was in her 60s, but the difference was for her that she remembers quite distinctly coming on a cylindrical craft. She was 9 feet tall, blonde hair, blue eyes, telepathic, and she absorbed nutrients from light. And she said the biggest challenge for her was walking into a 3-year-old girl's body and not knowing that she had to speak verbally and that she had to eat. And so for a little while, she really, really struggled just to understand this is how it operated on this planet. Fortunately, she was left with a little being to help her, but she said it was a real, real struggle to learn how to be human. And one of the things that she knows she does is very regularly she goes up to her galactic family and she actually tells them what's going on. She calls herself a kind of undercover kind of agent. And she said that she hadn't felt that she'd met many like her, only once when she went to China, and she remembers in China meeting this little Chinese lady, and they had this instant recognition that she was another one, but most beautiful, aware soul. But she said, I never talk about this to anyone. I never share this with anyone. And coming back to Earth, not always in human form, I was regressing a gentleman once who wanted to know a past life, and he instantly saw himself at Atlantis, but he wasn't human. He was actually a dolphin.
Hi. So I assume you saw the presentation yesterday. I was talking about parallel aspects, that sometimes you can come to the Earth and kind of split yourself in several aspects depending on the type of consciousness that you are. In other words, you could be born here in America, and at the same time another aspect of yourself could be born in India or what have you, or another aspect of yourself is still within the planetary grid, meaning within the Earth plane, about to be born. And that's how you communicate, you know, like we said earlier and what Michaela was saying. So the typical scenario for me that I see in terms of walk-ins is usually it's the same person. In other words, you are here right now in physical form, and another aspect of your being has been kind of in the background, waiting for the right time. And at the right time, the part of the consciousness that's in your, focused in your physical form is leaving, and the other aspect of you is replacing it. So it's really you, part one, and part two coming in. Does that make sense? And you do that because there are certain things that you need to accomplish up to a certain time. Let's say you have to be a mother and, you know, take care of children and do certain things maybe up until you're 40, and then after that your focus starts to be different. So that's how you coordinate, you orchestrate this switch. And actually I'm looking at you right now, and you're exactly at that time. The switch is not totally final, it's still happening, and I feel like you had to come here and get more understanding of how it works. Is it even possible? And to facilitate the process, and I think it's going to start to integrate more and more moving forward. Do you relate to that? Yeah, exactly. But you know, even though sometimes it's instantaneous, but even though you could feel a switch, but it continues to, the integration is not necessarily the switch. So you know, it kind of starts and then you integrate more and more and more and more. So in your case, that's how it works. To me, I usually, even for the cases where you see a reptilian coming in or what have you, I still feel it's the same type of lineage. Because think about it, if it's a one type of lineage and another type of lineage walks into your your lineage. It's almost like it's taking over as opposed to a walk-in the sense of you switching with another aspect of you or with another similar lineage being, which serves a different purpose. Occasionally, you're going to have a child that prematurely dies, and then you'd have another entity that would kind of take this opportunity. But the typical scenario is what I just said, is for you to continue the next chapter of your own journey.
Just another thought on this whole subject. With 3 of the walk-ins whom I have come to know, there are many occasions in which, although they're living their life here now in that body originally of someone else, but there are many occasions when they go back to where they came from briefly, maybe for a couple of hours or a few hours. And the first woman I discovered this with was living in a woman's body, but she was quite a masculine sort of person in this woman's body. And she went back frequently to her ship, her craft, and was the commander of a fleet of crafts. And so she had great authority when she would go back there. And then when she would come here, she couldn't act like that, but she had those impulses to be really in charge and to be sort of grandiose compared to the people around her. And then there was another woman who was a walk-in, and she immediately started doing metaphysical teaching and got her family that she had walked into to support her and help her to found a metaphysical bookstore. And she would go back sometimes, usually at night, for 2 or 3 hours, and during quote-unquote sleep, but this would happen. She'd go back to be with her original extraterrestrial beings and be with her father, who was a commander of that particular fleet. And so she wasn't a pilot when she would go back, but she would be with that group of beings and bring back some of their perspective and some of their teaching in the work that she was doing here. So I think that's very interesting. This was back in the very early 1990s. Some of my earliest people I worked with in regard to extraterrestrial things, and I realized, wow, some people have a dual identity and actually get to experience that here and there quite a bit.
My understanding is that the majority of living things on our planet were brought here from elsewhere, including dolphins and whales. And so my question is, how are dolphins and whales assisting humanity in the ascension process? I'm intrigued by this topic because, according to my spirit guides, I had a previous life as a cetacean in the Sirius star system. So anyway, I'm really excited to hear about your answers. Thank you.
That's an interesting question. And I've worked with the dolphins and whales, and I consider them to be collective energies that are Atlantean, that were in a timeline split and took a physical manifestation here on Earth because they had an assignment here. And I often experience them as working with the harmonic frequencies of Earth. So they're so very close to the crystalline core, and they exist in that crystalline structure of water because they can access very easily those harmonic frequencies. So I find that they have multiple assignments. I mean, all of us are working in different areas collectively and as individuals, and I believe that all races are similar to that. They don't come for just one purpose. I think they have many. I think many of them are working with healers here on the planet and have direct communication with healers to assist in those harmonic adjustments. I think some of these collective energies are working within the core of Mother Earth to assist us with transitions, because these new grid alignments that are coming in, they're an adjustment for our physical structure just as much as they're an adjustment for our energetics. Because as we energetically transition, there's a catch-up that happens here with our resonance and the way we're connecting more collectively, and just how we talked about a moment ago, tapping into these other timelines and soul vibrations. That's a lot of information to integrate. And I believe that they're here assisting us in that integration from a harmonic standpoint with our frequencies and helping us to balance those.
Right before you asked your question, I was going to make a point, and then I just was guided to just get back and just let the question be asked. And I was going to talk about dolphins. And Edgar Cayce said in Atlantis, dolphins were kept as domestic pets. And when I was younger, we had an aquarium in my town, and for the woman who ran the tank and trained the dolphin went out with my brother. So she let me, as a young boy, show up every day and play with the dolphin. I was kind of a strange, sad little boy. My mother was really mentally ill, and so I was really drawn to this dolphin, and I would play with him every day. I'd pass the ball, and he'd smile and look at me. And I would tell my father that this dolphin is basically giving me information. And of course, you know, I'm blue-collar town. My father's a union pipe fitter, and but he was very loving and very open, and you know, basically allowed me to transform into what I am today, hopefully embodying contradiction. And I could really feel that viscerally, that this dolphin was communicating with me. And I remember years ago, I met a woman called Almeen, if you've ever seen her in spiritual circles, and she said that the whale and the dolphins circle the planet and make sounds that allow procreation to take place on the planet. Now, I don't know if that rings true or not, but I always found that really kind of a fascinating thing. And there are many sources that talk about these beings coming from elsewhere, Sirius or other places, and it just rings true to me. They're really high beings, and just working with this dolphin, it was so wonderful. I got this Curious George ball. I had like lazy eye surgery. When I was a kid, my brother got me a Curious George doll, and he's older, my brother Steven. And I'm doing a moving job a couple months ago, and I saw this ball, and Curious George is riding the dolphin, right? And it was like, it's like this sacred object to me. I'm looking at it, and the guy's like, "You want that ball?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I definitely do." So I went down the hardware store, and I got it reinflated. It's like a Norman Rockwell scene. And I just look at that dolphin. It means so much to me. And I just know myself that the dolphin is a high being that's joyfully trying to help us remember who we are. That's the best way I would put it, you know? We don't have to overthink the problem. It's just like such a wonderful and free being that just wants to share joy, which that's what we're supposed to do, you know? It's like, wake up, you know?
I don't know anything about the consciousness of dolphins or whales on the planet, but I do know this. A couple of years ago at an alchemical retreat off of Puerto Vallarta, I hired a village person to take me miles off the shore just to tour. And when we were miles away and I looked in the distance and land was so little, I decided to dive off of the boat, not with a whole lot of forethought. And into the water I went, and I came up with a mouthful of water, and I blew it high in the air, and I said to the other ladies on the boat, "Look, I'm a whale." And a whale surfaced right beside me, and I was like eye to eye with this whale, and for 45 minutes it went under our boat, and it could have flipped us like that. It was, listen, this boat was hardly safe. It could have flipped us at any moment. But I do know this. I was filled with joy. I felt pure, unconditional play and love. And without any research or anything at all, I can tell you that that was an extraordinarily special time. And whatever these people who know more about the dolphin and whale lineage than I do, I know that I have a child's perspective of complete love and play with them. So.
I would just like to say from a lot of my research that what I've come to understand is they're extraterrestrials. They've come here and they do have homes elsewhere, and they are highly conscious and aware. But my own personal experience was actually swimming with a pod in Hawaii. And I remember the feeling that I had when I was looking and we were getting closer to them as I swam. And I can't tell you the feeling of emotion that I felt that was really incredible to feel. It was like somehow I knew them. And the feeling was that it was a very deep knowing. And I can't explain my emotion. I really can't, because I love dolphins anyway. But I couldn't explain that feeling of somehow being really connected to them. And that is my own personal experience, and it was quite profound. So for that, I am very sensitive to feeling that they are very highly evolved beings and they're here to help us.
For me, I think the entire animal kingdom is here to work with the earth, to facilitate different aspects of the actual earth ascension, speaking of ascension. So, for example, birds are working with the magnetic field of the planet. Other animals that are on 4 legs are working with the chemistry of the planet, the pulse of the planet, and of course the dolphins, being in the water, are working with the chemistry of the water, molecular restructuring of the water, and God knows how much we need restructuring of the oceans and the water. So in general, that is how they're rebalancing, restructuring the earth as a conscious being, and that in turn affects our consciousness and facilitates our awakening and our connection. It works with the new grid system to realign all these pathways. So that's how I believe they are in an indirect manner facilitating our ascension process. However, they also, dolphins specifically emit a sonar, a type of tone that is a kind of coherent or in resonance with the tone of the universe. It's kind of like, it's that stillness tone that is beyond the 3D frequency range, and because of that, when we are in proximity with dolphins, and because of that tone that they emanate, they spontaneously through resonance, they're kind of readjust or rebalance our own brain channels and our own tone. So that's why we feel emotional, because it's basically reconnecting with the universe, just like that. So that's why I feel they play a hugely important part indirectly through the earth and also in this direct manner.
I'll just add one thing, and that the dolphins and whales have chosen the water on our planet because it's a crystalline structure, and they're telepathic beings, and they're used to working with crystalline technologies. And so the water on our planet is, in essence, a crystalline technology for communication. And we know this because it's within our bodies this way as well. And we know we can communicate with the cellular water in our bodies and make dramatic change. So imagine those beings in the cellular connection to the earth, which is the water, communicating with that water, affecting the planet. And that's truly the way they operate to assist us.
Just another fun little note. When I was swimming off the coast of the big island of Hawaii for about 6 summers, every June I'd go over and join together with Joan Ocean. Some of you might know her, a wonderful, wonderful woman. And we would do workshops, and I would do regressions and so forth, and we'd swim with dolphins every morning. And she was so comfortable and so familiar with for years of swimming with dolphins, that she was able to really play with them. Now, these were wild dolphins that would come in from the open ocean. They weren't in a pen with people who could touch them. We were told not to touch them because our bacteria would be harmful for them. And the ones in captivity, apparently, that you can go and touch and play with, have to be inoculated, have to be inoculated every day with antibiotics. I hadn't known that. Isn't that awful? Anyway, the wild ones don't have that. But they would really be very playful, not with me, because I wasn't that accustomed to them, but Joan Ocean and a couple of her friends would dive down, and they would come and turn somersaults, and she'd bring a little ball with her, and they'd toss the ball back and forth, the dolphin with his nose and the human with the hand. And one time she said the dolphin came when they were playing. There were a whole bunch of dolphins, and one of them bumped into her by mistake, and she swears she distinctly heard the dolphin say, "Excuse me." Yeah. Not with a human voice, of course, a dolphin voice, because they can make kind of squeaking sounds. So this one said, "Excuse me," after he bumped into her.
Hello. I wrote my questions down. In regards to the kids today, two questions actually. I'm a teacher. I teach students with emotional and behavioral problems. So they're definitely dealing with a lot of karma and probably as multidimensional beings adjusting emotionally, mentally, all of that. Given all of that, one question is, what's the difference, you were talking between letter children and hybrid children? If there's, what are the subtle differences? Would they present themselves where that's identifiable? I'm curious. And my second question is, the more I'm learning about hearing, what we're talking about this weekend, kids are not benefiting from the current educational system. What can I do while I'm still in that system that would best address the needs of these kids? Are there specific tools or strategies that might increase their involvement or engagement, or is there anything off the top of your head that, short of starting my own school or being part of Ethan's, what can we do from within at this point in time?
Love them. Emotionally disturbed children and kids, teenagers that have a lot of issues, they generally don't have a lot of love in their life. If you could love them, show them that they can love themselves, this will help them reach their highest potential. I know it sounds easy, it's just love, but that's everything. That's the prime motivator. And when you can let the children see that they're more than they think they are, they're more than the environment that they live in, that they can do better and co-create their reality, allow them to see that they're not limited by the neighborhood or the income bracket that their parents come from, that because that they're downtrodden with issues, that doesn't make them less than anything. It just gives them an opportunity to rise higher. Love them.
I just want to say that from a different vantage point, I believe that we have so many of these children on the planet right now that exist that are struggling because the system has to fail in order for it to be reorganized into something that fits now who we're becoming. And we can see that in almost every area. Look at our medical institutions, for example. They're failing us. And the reason they're failing us is because there's an uprising of things that are going to replace that structure in order for humanity to continue to evolve. So it's difficult for us from a soul perspective to watch these children struggle, but that's why many of us are here to support them in our own unique ways. And oftentimes we have to just resort to the fact that the more we live in our truth, the more vibrational effect we're going to have on these kids. Because we can't force the issue. Sometimes in physical, we want to do something to deconstruct it and break it down and make the change, but the inner transition that we're walking and us being embodied in that transition is why they came to connect with you. So there's no mistake you're in that environment right now, in the situation that you're in, seeing what you see, because in some way you're a conduit for how that energy has to shift. And it shifts through their connection with you. You're empowering them through who you are and who you're becoming, not what you're doing about the situation. And it's almost like a mind's play that we're trying to mold and shape right now. You know, we're so in our heads about what we're going to do, but I say this all the time. I think right now on the planet it's about who we're going to be, because who we're being is forcing the vibrational change that's causing the crumbling of these structures. So to almost put a different perspective on it, I don't think it's good that children are struggling, but I think that there's a collective of children that are here to force us to create new pathways and avenues for them to heal and grow and change and create and expand.
When you say that, though, I mean, when you're saying that, new pathways, is there actually anything tangible that you've got in your mind that is helping? I know your weekends that you were talking about coming up next summer. I mean, these are telekinesis and spiritual gifts that you're going to teach, which currently in the system, it's algebra. It's not exactly moving the pencil across the table. Yeah. So I guess I just wonder, it's frustrating knowing that transition is years down the road, pieces here and there, but is it just expanding their mind, giving them more open times to come up with creative? I'm like at a loss. It's crazy.
I'll let the other experts who work with kids talk about maybe technologies or techniques, but I mean, I feel like ultimately it's difficult when you're in an old timeline trying to bring in new concepts, because the guidance will always say when people ask this question in a live session, they'll say that the only thing you can do when you're operating in an old material timeline is to bring your new consciousness to what exists in that timeline. And what begins to happen is energetic shifts take place, right? But see, we forget that everyone has free will, right? Because souls in this, we operate in universal law. So every being that is in your collective right now, the children, the teachers, the educators, the administrators, they all have free will, right? But we have people that are within these old timelines, such as yourself, with a new consciousness, not because they're meant to do something specific. You're going to do all the right things when the time presents itself, but because of who you are, right, and what you believe and the way you approach these children and the new thoughts that you bring in, the emotional support that you give them, it's a different vibration. It comes from a different place. So you're actually bringing in the new grid vibration into an old timeline, and it's very subtle. And I think that sometimes we feel the desire, the guilt, right, the responsibility, the heaviness of the situation, the desire to change it, and we don't realize sometimes the very large changes we're forcing energetically with who we're bringing or how we're bringing ourselves to the timeline, right? What we're bringing to the timeline. So I'm going to pass it to whoever has specific technologies. Yes.
Well, for me, this is the big one. This is our future we're talking about here. And I believe that there's many levels to the orchestration of the programs to help these children that are coming in. And many of those asking the questions like yourself are the new ones, because you wouldn't be asking this if it wasn't the case. You already know that something has to happen. You already feel it and sense it. And I meet many educators across the globe now who are contacting me saying, I see these kids in my class. I know they're there. How do I help them? And there are a number of educators. One of them, in fact, I've written about in my latest book, and she's created a curriculum for them. And I can actually put you in contact with her. a lady that said she herself was one of the new ones. And the interesting thing is I'm finding it right across the board. Nurses that know there has to be a new way with healing. Midwives that know they're birthing the star children and know there has to be a different energy. So the mere awareness of that means it's changing. It does, like everything else, it's subtle until I think the 100th monkey, when all of a sudden everybody gets it. In the meantime, just recognizing it and using that awareness that you have to recognize these children. The teachers that are aware are writing to me and saying, I can see them in the class. I know which ones they are. And they will find themselves behaving differently. The great thing with the kids is that they recognize it too. They'll recognize it as one 9-year-old wanted to talk to me and I said, why do you want to talk to me? And he said, it's because of your frequency. So there you have it. They will see from your frequency, they will know you're more open, your response is going to be on a non-verbal level. They are aware that you want to help. So this isn't because they're not unconscious, they are extremely conscious, and they will know from you that you're trying to help and what have you. I have talked about this, and I know Ethan, it's one of his really primary motivations as well, is how do we support them through the transition that I believe is happening right now. And one of the ways that I've looked at the new education is this. These children will be teaching us what they need. In other words, it will be an environment where we create the environment and they tell us what it is they need so that we can provide that, so they can be all they can be and to teach us. So it's going to be a reversal of roles for a start, which is a completely new way of understanding this because of their awareness, because of what they're learning off-world and how they understand that. Really, it's the environment that we need to provide with love and support so they can do what they've come here to do. So that in itself is a completely new way of looking at how to support them. But the mere fact that you are who you are with the frequency that you have, these children will come to you. They will know that you understand. So, we try to think of all the ways we can do this, but your intuition, your sense and knowing is all that's you're going to need to guide you. You're in the position because you know what to do, if you know what I mean.
I think it's a bit tough to try to shift the system or do things that are alternative within the system. So if I can recommend something that's something practical that you can perhaps begin with, and I'm not sure if you're already doing that, but working with so many people, helping so many people get through blocks and emotions as they are older now, I noticed that in their childhood, the root cause is always unresolved emotional block. So if you I would say, if you can begin to help them work through the emotion. In other words, instead of, if they're very angry or sad or having a fit, instead of simply trying to calm them down, which is good, but try to kind of understand or help them go through the emotion to figure out where it's coming from. You see what I mean? So it's like, tell me what you're feeling. Why do you think you feel this way? Do you like feeling this way? You know what I mean? Like, get them to understand their own emotions rather than, try to save them or, And I feel that the more you do that, the more they start to understand themselves. And the next time they get into that rage or that anger or what have you, they kind of learn to accept it and go through it as opposed to being confused or pretending it's not there or looking for answers outside themselves. You see what I mean? These are small, practical things that you can do within the system without, like teaching them telepathy and, all that stuff. Because I feel this work is extremely important also to develop their psychic skills. But I think, unfortunately, all of that type of education is outside the system. So perhaps in some cases, I don't know if you can recommend it or I don't know, but there are educators that have created programs for children to develop the psychic abilities and things like that. But I think within the system, you can do a lot with this emotional charge, which ends up being a huge problem if they're not worked through at this age. Does that help?
One of the things I'd like to also say is it brings to mind two things. One of them was a mother writing to me about her daughter, who she said was telepathic from birth, was tuning into everybody, and this became more and more obvious as she got older. And she said her biggest problem, the little girl now was 3 years old, and she said, and she's still reading my mind, she still knows everything I think. And she said, you know, the hardest thing, Mary, is watching my thoughts, because my daughter is picking them up. And to follow on from that, and this is the crucial thing here about us evolving with the children, is I did a regression with a young lady of 13. And one of the things that she told me was, Mary, my biggest problem at school is this. My teacher often is saying one thing, but she's actually thinking something else, and what she's thinking isn't very nice. So what this says to me is we really have to upgrade with the kids, that this is us coming from that pure thought of love and acceptance, not just saying it, but actually being it. And this is how it's going to change. Does that make sense? Okay, the other thing I'd like to say is in terms of the letter people you were mentioning, and also the hybrids, my suspicion is that the hybrid is just a more awakened individual in the sense of their hybrid nature, because we're all hybrids. But some of us are more awake than others. And what the young man that I spoke to who talked about his own hybrid nature at 16 was explaining, because we have all the input from these our ancestors, the many ancestors that have put in their genetics within us, as our frequency rises, then we start to resonate at the frequencies of those particular genetics, whether it's Pleiadian. If you've reached the frequency of Pleiadian in you, you will feel Pleiadian. Or if you've reached the frequency Arcturian, then you will feel Arcturian. Although we have everything within us, and we can ultimately relate to everything. So the letter children really are just showing us that they're wired differently, and they're wired differently because they're more awake multidimensionally. And that also will lead into, if they're supported, the understanding and knowing that they're not from here and that they're connected to these many different species. So it's really a matter of how awake they are, I suspect, more than anything else. Does that make... Thank you.
I'll just add something really quick for those of you who don't know. Flower of Life has a conscious youth movement, and similar to what Barbara talked about with the hybrids getting together and feeling like they were family, we've seen that with the youth. We've connected, we started here locally with the local program where we got kids together who are interested in talking about connections, ETs, you know, telepathy, all these things, and they're amazing. Talk about teaching the class. We don't need to teach anything. They run the class. But we started to expand this out internationally, and so we got kids together from age 9 to 18 on a group call twice a month. And what I began to notice was when you let them run the conversation, they'll begin to talk about what's going on in school or things that their parents want them to do and how hard that is on them, or the guidance they get about that. It was amazing. They were showing us pictures, drawing pictures of their guides and beings and how they come in at certain times and assist them through things. And I feel like just having that outlet for them is so valuable, you know, putting them together with other kids that, you know, might be having a similar situation where they can express that. Because what we've found and the roadblock that we've come up against is a lot of these children have parents who aren't necessarily awakened to these issues and what's going on with them. So it's hard for them to exist in that educational structure and not have the support of others that understand what's going on with them. We're going to have a kids camp we're planning next summer, where we're going to get these kids together. It's kind of like a Harry Potter themed camp where we're going to be teaching all these really cool things. Well, we're not going to be teaching them. There'll be, you know, there'll be outlets for spiritual art and telepathy and all these things that they already know how to do. So.
I was a coach for a number of years, and I learned the best way to deal with kids was, and I'll also say I dealt with troubled at-risk youth for a couple of years as a coach, and part of a mentor program. Always lead with something like that's a positive. In basketball, for instance, it was like you're very good at rebounding, but you have to work on your left hand dribbling, to get even better. And that opens the reticular center and allows the information to come through. It's like, you feel good about yourself, and you're open to hear maybe something that's a little critical. And I learned that because at first it was like there's a lot of coaches, they're successful at first and then they burn out, like Bill Parcells in the NFL. You just ride everyone in a negative fashion, and it temporarily brings out, that response to perform, and then it just dies off because there's no love and inspiration behind it. And, I found that the best thing, because I struggled with the same things that you struggle. I want to change this whole system, but it's more bring out in the person, in the student, what they love. Oh, you love horses. Let's talk about that. I'll bring it. I got this book at the library about horses. It doesn't have to be something that's happening in the school. It's like pinpoint what it is the person loves. Everybody has these loves that sometimes you don't even know what they are. It's like, I'm just focused on staying alive and earning a living, But the reality is that love is what inspires you in life and mitigates anxiety. And you look at our society and the opioid crisis, I see that as a side effect of a dehumanizing society that doesn't appreciate what people love and fit, the curriculum so they can embody that in their life. I love building stone arches and stone towers in the middle of the woods and things like that, like the Lord of the Rings, and it's just what I love. And, I do it on the weekends or after work, and I had to cultivate that within myself. So with your students, maybe just tap into, you love something, and it might take a while to unmask this, but what is it, I just love geology, or I love rocks, or I love the ocean. And that will carry them through this difficulty if you can help facilitate that. That's what I feel anyways, for everybody, what is it you love, That's the thing, that's where you're connecting with the divine. It manifests in this human form by that inspiration of what you love. I think that's, to me, I found that to be the most important thing to bring out in people and to connect with them on that level.
Thank you. Those were all very impactful. Can you please share or explain the contrast or difference of the Nacals and Elohim?
These are two different conscious, they want to understand the difference between the Nacal and the Elohim, what they are?
Yes.
Or who they are. Oh, interesting question. Well, I've experienced both of these forms of collective consciousness when I channel, but I believe collective consciousness is very subjective, vibrational, and always changing. So it's hard to nail down or pinpoint, and I think that's the chronic question. People want to know, well, who were the Anunnaki? What did they do? What are they responsible for? And I think similar to the human race, every collective has a variety of different experiences and vibrational timelines, and it's hard to nail that down and define it the way that in our human mind we want to define everything. But we ultimately bring the definition to everything in our lives anyway. So with that being said, I believe the Nacala is a 12-dimensional or multi-dimensional council that existed in Atlantis, and I believe that they had oversight over a variety of different technologies, as well as ensuring that those technologies were beneficial for that collective energy. Because what I notice about these councils like the Nacal, oftentimes they function in a one intention. So they operate a little differently than we do. We think about ourselves and our families and our kids, and we kind of operate in this linear world, but these Nacal type collectives, they're in a love-based frequency. And in a love-based frequency, they've integrated a lot of the tools that we use separately, like the emotional body. And that emotional body functions for the benefit of the collective. So when things like technologies are coming into the collective of Atlantis, these councils are ensuring that they're in the highest integrity to be used for the benefit of not just that collective, but the entire universe. Because as we talked about, everything that we're doing is expanding the entire universe. So So these councils were present and formed for singular intentions that would benefit the entire collective in the universe based on activities that went on in these collectives. So that's who I believe the Naacal to be. And some of these ancient collectives are made up of a variety of different races. You know, the Naacal, I feel, was more of an Atlantean collective, but I also work with a Council of Light. This Council of Light is made up of many different races. Again, love-based frequency, singular intention, and that is to make sure that information flows through the grids in a beneficial way that does not disrupt other races and beings and create timelines that are a problem for humanity and for everyone else. However, in doing this, they will not step on anyone's free will. And everyone, all these races, they operate in different planetary structures with different universal law. Just so happens here on this earth, we operate in free will. So I get this question a lot. I know I'm going off topic, but I'll get back to the Elohim. I get this question a lot. Why don't they just come here and change everything? Because they can't. Why don't they just come here and clean all this up? When are they going to do that? Well, they would love to do that. But what we don't realize is a lot of what's happened here, it's not just about that one ocean. It's not just about that one war. These things are all connected to other things. So they come in and change one thing. There's a ripple effect that goes beyond that timeline. So free will is really free will. They come in and tamper with that. That's going to have changes that are going to affect everybody. So the way they do this is they activate the grids. They activate the crystalline core of Mother Earth. They give us information through channels and other sources. They help us to rediscover history through raising our vibrations so we have more information to work with. The Elohim, a little different, and to be honest with you, maybe I'll defer to some others here on the panel, but I've had the Elohim come in. I believe they're very connected to the Christ consciousness. They operate more in an angelic realm. They feel very intentionally directed on the soul frequency and the way that we create. I believe there's a variety of master teachers that make up that collective, so it's not just one but many. But that Elohim energy, it's almost like a trinity, like there's a three aspect to it that always shows up for me. Like we sometimes think Father, Son, Holy Spirit, we know this whole three pattern trinity energy. That Elohim operates in that energy, but it often will pull in information about our inner creative source and how we work with that at the soul level.
There's a hierarchy of, or levels of awareness and consciousness, and the groups are just all trying to do the exact same thing, which is to propagate the expansion of consciousness without trampling our free will, allowing us to walk the path that we're destined to. Having them sweep in and clean up our problems doesn't help us. It's up to us to figure out how to do it. Otherwise, it's like a parent always cleaning up after their child. In order for the child to be self-sufficient, it needs to learn to clean up after itself. And so they have to understand their place. They just can't come and take care of our issues for us. It's the learning process. But I agree that they're more of the celestial, higher than what would say an extraterrestrial, bands past the big Virgo cluster, where you see where certain extraterrestrials come down all in different densities. I think that the Elohim are celestial and more angelic, and the others are a council to advise.
I think the first group is more of a planetary consciousness, also maybe connected to Atlantis and Lemuria and that sort of thing, and they do feel like a group kind of planet assisting the planet in the governance, I want to say. But the Elohim are more universal, feel more of the spiritual order, more shifting the spiritual consciousness as opposed to attending to material needs. So to me, that's the two differences. But just another quick thing to add to what these two lovely ladies just said, which I totally agree with in terms of, because I get that question too, like when are they going to show up? Why don't we see the spaceship, land on the White House lawn or whatever? I mean, again, the same thing. It's like we don't need a Band-Aid because the Band-Aid is going to wear out. unless you shift the root cause, which is consciousness. Consciousness is the one that created the misaligned politics. Consciousness is the one that created the misaligned educational system. Consciousness is the one that created the misaligned healthcare system. You see what I mean? So fixing the healthcare, fixing the war, and fixing does not work. So that's the reason why you have to go back to the core, fixing the human or shifting the human consciousness, elevating it to a much bigger universal level. That's the only way, and that is, of course, free will. So that's the reason why they can come all day long, and they are coming, and they are here, and they are here. Look around. Assisting and teaching and supporting and shifting and grid aligning. I mean, it is happening. But again, it's unless we begin ourselves on an individual level saying, okay, what can I do today to shift my consciousness to the next level of awareness? It could be a very small thing. Maybe usually I go and park my car without thinking about my neighbor, or just silly things like that. Just think about it. What can you do today on an individual basis to do something different, to elevate, to go to that next level of consciousness? If you did that and your neighbors did that and the whole county did that and then the country did that and the countries did that, that's how we're going to get out of this. Not always looking for someone outside ourselves. I mean, let's take back the power already. You know, we are the ETs. Who are we kidding? Right? We have scientific evidence. The scientists keep telling us it's impossible not to have, and so we are awakening to our cosmic heritage. We know it. I think we need to get past that topic. And you know what I mean? And kind of become the ETs or become the consciousness, evolved consciousness that we really are. That we are global citizens, we are galactic citizens, we are universal citizens. You know, so I think the more we kind of talk this way, the more we become this way, the more we emanate that energy, the more it, you know, we're now spreading that resonance. And that's how we can help others. That's how we can shift others, you know. And so I feel that, I don't know how we got onto this subject, but with the Elohim, you know. But you see what I mean? And I don't know how many of you are sensitive. I think a lot of you are. But do you feel as I'm speaking, are we not shifting? Seriously, that's all that we need to do. Because with that, all the openings happen, the guidance happens, the clarity happens, the healing happens, the awakening happens, the ascension happens, you see. So it's actually quite simple. You know, it's all about love. I don't know how I got on that, but...
You know, don't be afraid to have a breakdown. Let go of all the emotional baggage and look at it as a breakthrough. You have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And until we take that step to break down the barriers of emotional acceptabilities and social acceptances, we won't be able to do the work, which is the healing. And when we're healing and coming from a place of personal empowerment, we won't have these emotions that are running all over the place and dictating how we're supposed to behave in the world. When we understand the specific energies of the human body in correlation to the planet, as we heal ourselves, we're healing each other, and we are in this together. And we will do it together, not with some external source coming down. We can self-correct.
Hi, and thank you. For those of us on our path of awakening and evolving, I have seen in groups that a part of their process is an integration of resolving the karma of all of your meta-soul aspects. So for those of us who haven't made it yet to that point where we are in contact with our past lifetimes yet, is that a piece for everyone that's moving towards a 5D ascension path, that we will all download those pieces of the information from our old lifetimes to resolve that karma? Is that a necessary piece?
I think, so just I want to clarify what you're asking. You're asking, is it necessary for us to continue to hold karma to be in a new grid structure here on the earth, or a higher dimensional experience?
Well, and to awaken to those past lifetimes, to have the awareness and download of the old karma.
Right.
Because I'm definitely at the place where I've made awarenesses of what has happened in this lifetime, and I've gone into a state of allowing and a state of personal forgiveness of self and of others. But I have not made it yet to that point of having those awarenesses of my prior lifetimes. So is that piece of resolving past lifetime karma consciously, is that a piece that those of us on the ascension path are all going to experience?
I kind of have a different perspective on karma and healing karma, and we've been in that realm for a long time. We've been going into the soul, and we have all these cords and past timelines we have to resolve, and I kind of think that's endless. You know, I feel like when we go through that area of our record, we could heal forever. There's so much there. But I don't look at karma as necessarily negative. I describe it this way. I believe that we come with intentions, and I believe that we make collective decisions. So as we transition off this planet, or we come here from another dimension, we have intentions that we hold, and these intentions are actually for us to grow and expand, because we're vibrational beings. So humans like comfort. They like to stay stagnant. They like to stay safe. They like to know what's coming next. But if we were to be that way, we would never continue the expansion of the universe. So we have to come with these, what I call ascension codes, which hold karmic experiences within them. So as a planet revolves around these ascension codes, we're triggered. And we have this intention that comes up. It's energetic, okay? So we mold and shape our experience through our perception and response to it. So what happens oftentimes, we have these karmic situations, we create density around the karma. So I believe that density is different from karma. And I think that density is that thick emotional material that we hold onto in the karmic experience that keeps us blocked from the information we need to continue to ascend. So I don't necessarily feel like we're ever going to fully work through the karma. I think the karma is actually purposeful and important for us to have to continue this growth and ascension. But where we have to focus, similar to what Lori was just saying about the emotions, is we have to get a grip on the way we walk through the experience with a new consciousness. Because what's happened here in the past is we've walked through karmic experience with a very material density, very material perception, very singularly, not feeling connected to source, not supported by source. And we hold all of this density that is now fear-based energy within our structure that makes us fear karma and makes us feel like we got to rid all this stuff because we don't want to go through difficult times. But I think the fact of the matter is we have to go walk through experience and go through these times in order to continue to ascend. But we can walk through them with a new consciousness that doesn't accumulate the density that we've carried thus far. So what I believe as we continue to evolve, it's not that the karma goes away, but we're going to deal with the density better so that we can walk through this experience with a new perspective, continuing to ascend and not accumulating the density that holds us back. Does that make sense?
I'm just going to add really quickly, you know, as far as past lives go and clearing karma from them, it's already here. Whatever issues that you're carrying from the past life are in your present life. So you don't really have to go back. You just have to take an opportunity to begin to practice equanimity, the ability to remain calm among chaos, having emotional control, not being triggered. So karma is just giving you an opportunity to develop further. The idea of karma as a punishment or you get what you give, I don't really feel that that's entirely accurate or appropriate. But there is a next step. When we do have equanimity, when we are coming from a place of personal empowerment and are no longer judging other people or feeling superior or making somebody feel inferior, when you're confident and safe enough to be self-actualized, you begin to actually move the energy into what we call dharma, which is taking the responsibility to then teach and allow others to fully experience their emotions so that they can begin to gain a grip on them. It's the emotional energy that creates that density. That's absolutely true. The emotional baggage that we have stops us from healing. You know, we see people who are exhibiting anger. Anger's a mask. It's not real. And when you can look at the truth, what somebody's really feeling is they're hurt, they're embarrassed, they're scared. We're getting down deeper and deeper into the real truth so that we can look at the situation. Past lives are our current lives. All of those emotions are here right now. We have an opportunity to self-correct, to look at things differently, to begin to let things go, and sort of self-acceptance and forgiveness and responsibility. The past is just 1 second ago. It's this moment that counts, and the next steps that we take, this is how we shift.
I don't know if you were referring to what I was saying yesterday in the presentation about parallel lives. Okay, I'm not sure. But again, I agree that karma is not a law of punishment, because in some cultures you think, oh, you did that in a past life, so now you have to suffer. That's not at all my understanding of it or my experience of it. It's just simply things that you didn't complete or master in a past life or parallel life. But I believe that in terms, going back to your question, in terms of ascension or mastery, if you will, I think there are different steps. The first step is this aspect of your being, this human aspect. And your past lives normally, like Laura was saying, come through this aspect. So if you were to work on this aspect, technically, you would finish, complete what's happening for you in this lifetime, what happened in your childhood, resolve all of these things, your current issues. And then your other past lives will actually filter through this being. So you don't have to travel back and, although there's nothing wrong with it, I'm just saying that technically, even if you were to focus on this aspect at this moment, the rest will come through this aspect. However, at one point, yesterday, I talked about parallel aspects, which is a different thing. So once you've resolved all of these karmic issues or, from current and other lives, then at one point, to me, I feel like this is the final step of mastery. It's like the graduation step. This is when you become aware of your original consciousness, your original consciousness mass. And as you do that, you kind of become aware of parallel and all the aspects that you've had since the beginning of time as a human. So that's kind of more part of recollecting or going back to your original self, so that's kind of, to me, the final graduation, if you will, step. And once you have that recollection, you are kind of complete in a way, and that's, to me, the mastery or the ascension, because you kind of on earth become your original mass, a consciousness mass, before you left wherever you came from. And that becomes as above, so below. You become what you used to be, only in human form. Does that make sense? So that's how it works for me.
I just make one more point that I notice in my session work, because I have a lot of healers that come to me for session, and we've been working in this karma and these past timelines, and it's been great because we've been able to heal things and emotionally connect to information, but again, it goes on and on and on, and what the guidance has been is that we're moving more towards activation for healing. So similar to what Caroline did in her session yesterday, we're made up of patterns in sacred geometry, and we continue to stay on these patterns and rerun our karma because of our consciousness. So we can override those patterns very easily when we're activating information, as opposed to having to go into the density, go into the past lives, review all of that stuff, because we kind of can get stuck there, So activation is the new way of healing, which is overriding those negative patterns and having to focus in that past life stuff to move into where you're going next, which is a new consciousness, a new timeline, right? Reprogramming, great, yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. Give it up for our presenters, Caroline Corey, Mary Rodwell, Laura McDonald, Michaela Sheldon, Barbara Lamb, and Jim Vieira. And thank you guys for all of your wonderful insight and contribution. It is such a pleasure having you here, and we are so thankful.
I hope you enjoyed this special episode of Awaken Empowered TV from our 2017 Awaken Empowered Expo. Join me next week as I speak with another incredible individual who's standing on leading edge and changing the world.
Humanity has been on an epic journey of discovery, learning the truth about the world we live in. New discoveries about the true origins of humanity, ancient history, free energy, as well as the systematic corruption of world governments are now on the forefront of our daily reality. Is the world headed towards destruction based on control and power? Or is an opportunity now being presented to shift and uplift into a higher consciousness? My name is Mel V, co-founder and creative director of Conscious Consumer Network, an independent broadcast network that was launched on the 1st of January 2015. In the last 3 years, Conscious Consumer Network has broadcast over 2,800 shows in multiple languages, featuring guests from across the world, whilst creating media that is aimed at the creation of a free, fair, peaceful, just, sustainable world. Conscious Consumer Network provides full training and an interactive support network for all broadcasters, and we are always looking for inspiring and educational content.
Hi, this is Lainey Liberty.
And this is Miro Siegel.
In 2018, Conscious Consumer Network has expanded to multiple broadcast locations, increasing our availability and reach across the world, remaining on the cutting edge of independent media. If we wish to create a better world, we must first create better media, geared towards real education instead of indoctrination.
You guys really are what changing the world is going to be about. It's educating kids at a grassroots level.
Having become a pillar of stability in the turbulent world of independent media, we have even more going on in 2018. Conscious Consumer Network is a publicly funded network, and we rely on all of you to keep us on the air. Show your support for independent media by donating to our 2018 Network Support Fund. Dare to seek a better world. Support independent media.